I've owned 26 vehicles and I'm only 25 years old. That's nearly one for every year that I've been on this planet. But of course, I haven't owned all these cars and bikes since I was a baby. In today's video, we're going to be running through every single car and motorbike that I've owned, why I bought them, why I sold them, what I enjoyed about them, what I didn't enjoy about them, and at the end, we're going to be rating my top 5 cars. My name's Pat, you're watching 2PJZ, so let's get into it. Starting the list, my first car was my 2002 BMW E46 325 Ci in topaz blue. I have very, very fond memories of this car, as I think most people do with their first car. It was a testament to all the hard work that I'd put in my teenage years during casual jobs, and I spent pretty much everything that I had on that car. I spent, I think, $9,000 on it, which was a lot of money at the time. It was obviously the most significant purchase that I'd ever made in my life, and it was immaculate. I brought it off a BMW enthusiast, an older guy who lived down the road from me, and it just made me feel awesome. I did what most P-platers do, and straight away, without doing any form of maintenance work or any form of servicing, went and put an exhaust on it, which made the M54 sound really nice. So the exhaust sounded great. I was really happy with the car. I didn't really do a whole lot to it. It already came on some aftermarket wheels, and then for one of the first things I did with it was put a M3 bar on it. So I got a replica M3 bar because of course when you're a teenager you're not going out and buying genuine parts, and probably couldn't fit a genuine M bar on a stock-bodied 325 Ci. But the colour always resonated with me. It was a very, very special car. It was something I really enjoyed. I had lots of very fond memories in it. Went to all my first car shows. Just, you know, you have that form of freedom that you have in your first car to be able to go anywhere at any time with anyone. It was a very, very beautiful car. It's one that I miss a lot, and sadly it came to a very unfortunate ending when I was going out for dinner one night. I was heading through a traffic light and someone turned right on the traffic light. On Australia, obviously we drive on the left side of the road, so someone had turned right, crossing into my lane at the wrong time. They'd misjudged it, didn't see me coming through, and T-boned me on the driver's side door. But thankfully, in those cars, the 325 Ci's, they were built proper, so I was not injured. I didn't have a scratch on me whatsoever. Thankfully, the car doors on that 325 Ci were built like aeroplane doors. Being the coupe, it had the really long doors, and they were thick. Like, they were some thick pieces of metal. Couldn't believe it. No one was hurt in that crash, not even the person who was at fault. And sadly, with the amount of damage done to the car, it was a write-off, and it was really sad for me. You know, it was a very, very special car, but I think that sort of then started this snowball effect of when I would get into buying and selling cars. And I always say in life that I think everything happens for a reason, and that car went and led me to buy my Nissan Skyline 25 GT, which, you know, if you have watched this channel for a while, if you've seen a few of my previous videos, which you can go and do now, open a new tab and open some of my older videos to watch after this one, you would know that I'm a massive R34 Skyline fan. I'm a big Nissan guy. I love the R34 GTR. I will say it multiple times over and over again. It's my absolute dream car. I'm just obsessed with them. So buying that car was obviously the P-plate equivalent of, as close as I could get to the GTR at the time, was the non-turbo 25 GT. So it was a 2.5 litre 6-cylinder engine. I had a lot of fun with that car. It was obviously very different to my E46, but that was when I sort of started really getting into more hills driving, getting more involved in the car scene with the Japanese car community. That car was great. I sort of bought it with a few mods already on it. When it did arrive though, I bought it off someone who hadn't told me the full story, so it arrived and pretty much underneath the car was just manky. I didn't do my due diligence and get it checked properly, and if you are looking at buying a car, obviously make sure it gets checked properly, because that was a very expensive mistake that cost me about $4,000 in repairs as soon as it arrived, after I'd already spent around $10,000 on it, which again, at the time I was only around, I think maybe 18, so which will be a consistent theme that you see across this video, is me when I did spend big money on cars. It was pretty much everything that I had. That car was good. I've had that for a little while, and then, you know, as you grow up a little bit, you sort of mature a bit. I wasn't really that keen on the non-turbo. It was obviously very slow, and I wanted something a bit more unique, and then I bought my Volkswagen Mk4 R32 Golf, which was a really, really cool car. So that car was, I think, I can't remember off the top of my head, it was in the 120s, I think, 124 out of 200 that was delivered to Australia. But that was probably the car that kickstarted a lot for me. It helps grow this YouTube channel a little bit. My most watched video on YouTube currently, which you can open in a news tab as well and watch after, is my pros and cons of owning a Mark IV R32 Golf. It's a much chubbier, much hairier on the face version of me doing that video back in 2017 or 2018, whenever I put it up. I think it was 6 odd years ago now. It was really cool to be able to share that car with the car community, with you guys watching this video. A lot of people who found my channel found me through that car because it was so unique, because there were only 200 of them in the country, and it wasn't something that people shared much about on the internet, besides being in those really weird VW forums that I got lost in a few times, and I'm very thankful I don't have to be in much anymore because they're a very, very weird place. It was a 3.2 litre VR6 engine, so it made a really unique noise. It was really, really fun. It helped me grow a lot at that period of time. I mean, I just left school, was sort of going out into the world for the first time, and it was a really good icebreaker for me with a lot of people. I met a lot of friends through that car. I started the VWR SA owners group on Facebook, where we'd go out for cruises, and just met heaps of friends who are still good friends today through that car, and I'm very thankful for it. So, and then I'm glad it went to an enthusiast, so I still know where it is now. I sold it to someone, and then they've recently sold it to another guy that I actually met when I had the car back in Adelaide. So Adelaide's a small place. If you haven't been there before, the car community is very, very well connected. So moving on from that, I had just got my full license in around early 2019, which means in Australia, once you get your full license, you are graduated to buying any car that your wallet can afford. Essentially, you can buy any turbo car, V8s, all sorts of powers, outputs, and you're not restricted anymore as to what you can buy like you are on your P-plates. So, being the massive rally fan and Japanese domestic market fan that I am, I went and bought my Mitsubishi Evo 6 Tommi Makinen edition, which was an awesome car. It was just fantastic. Opened my mind to a whole new world of driving experience and just this visceral feeling that I had never felt before. I'd never had a turbo car before. I'd only ever been a passenger in a turbo car, but actually driving it, the noises it would make, the way it would make you feel, how connected it was to the road, it was just insane. It was a homologation rally car, of course, so this was pretty close to the real thing that they were racing in WRC at the time it was produced. So it was amazing. It is still the best car that I have ever driven in the hills, hands down. It's something that I miss greatly, and it, again, like all cars, I met my main group of friends that I have now through that car, and without owning that car, I probably wouldn't have met all the friends that I have now. So it is amazing how cars can really help you connect with people and with like-minded people. It's just one of those weird things, I'm very fond of that car. I miss it a lot. During the time of my ownership of that car, I didn't really do a whole lot to it. I put a new exhaust on, did the brakes and a few other little bits and bobs. I think I changed the intake. I put an Apple CarPlay head unit in and a few other things. But for me, that car was just about getting out, learning how to drive properly, experiencing anything that I could. I did a couple YouTube videos in that car, put the Rally Art cluster in, which was like an awesome piece of history. If you know me, you can see behind me, I'm massive on the history of cars as well, and all the little trinkets and bits of paraphernalia that you can collect when you're into these cars. I've got millions of different GTR brochures and Hot Wheels cars and models and all sorts of things behind me here, and I just need the car now to obviously pair them with. But I owned that Evo for well over a year. I sold it in 2020, so I took it to the track. It was my first time on track in that car up at the Bend Motorsport Park in Adelaide. Obviously, at the time of owning my Mitsubishi Evo Tommi Makinen edition, I wasn't daily driving it. Considering I'd spent all my money on that car, I think I paid at the time $28,500 or something for it. I needed something cheap and cheerful to daily drive, so I thought it would be a good idea to go and buy a Subaru. And I can hear a lot of people laughing at me. I bought a Subaru Liberty RX Gen 2 Wagon in a dark green. It was really cheap. I saw Liberty, which I liked. I saw Wagon, which I liked. I saw dark green, which I liked. And I saw a manual, which I also liked. Looked after. I posted a video on that, servicing that, doing the brakes and some other bits and bobs on that car. And then was fine for a few months. I think maybe got 6 months life out of that. And then the clutch and gearbox just sort of vanished out of nowhere. Like one day it was working and then the next day it wasn't. And at the time, because I had my Evo, I didn't really have any other money. But all the money I was earning, I was spending on that car on mods and insurance and fuel and other bits and bobs. job, so I didn't have any money left for the Liberty to fix it, to sort out the clutch and the gearbox issues, and reluctantly had to sell it. Otherwise I probably would have held on to it for a bit longer, because it was just so easy and you could just throw it around and weren't really fussed because it was only worth a couple of grand. And again, just not thinking with my head, just thinking with my heart, I went and bought a BMW E30 for about $2,000. And this was a auto 318i. The only redeeming thing about that car was that it had been resprayed in this beautiful dark blue color and actually looked really, really nice. Like, it looked fantastic. It was a sedan. I'd always liked the coupes. The sedan was the only thing that was available on the market at that point in time. It was one of the cheapest things I could find. I looked at a couple other ones, but this was really nice. Like, the paint job had been done properly. I had plans of wanting to engine swap it and put an M52 in, which I got around to. I just wanted to drive it as it was, but it had the classic things wrong with it. Like, it was just rattling all the time. The higher you would rev it, the more you would hear the valve lifter tick that happens on those 4 cylinders all the time. But it did the job. Really basic, really analog. The only thing that went wrong with that, like really wrong, was just when I was leaving the gym one morning and I drove over a storm drain that I didn't see, and the car was already low. I'd put some headed shocks and springs on it and some aftermarket wheels. And if you know E30s, you know that the sump, particularly on the M10, hangs really low, like really dangerously low. So if you go over anything too hard, you're going to take the sump off, and that's exactly what I did. I ripped the sump into a million different pieces and dumped all of my oil all over the road at the gym, which was not fun at all, and then fixed that. That was pretty cool. It was one of the first bigger things that I'd done on a car besides oil changes and fitting brakes and that sort of thing. So it made me feel really good to be able to fix that. But never work on a car where you're scraping off gasket sealant without safety glasses on. I can still feel it in my eyes, or the old gasket. It was not a fun time. But that car was great. I sold that car to a guy in Melbourne, and sadly it got T-boned in a car accident and got written off. He was planning to M52 swap it. That wasn't ideal because it was a really cool car. I had that at the same time that I had the Evo, and I thought, I can't have one car that I'm actively modifying and one car that I'm planning to modify and not saving any money at the same time. So I sold the E30 to the guy in Melbourne who ended up having it written off, and it was around that same time that I sold the Evo to buy my FD RX-7. I sold the Evo because the easiest description is I get bored really easily. So I was like, I'd had the Evo for a year, sort of thought that I'd done everything that I wanted to do with it, and I thought, I see the RX-7 market is starting to go up, as things were at the time with COVID. Everyone knows, if you're into cars, prices were going crazy for everything that was sort of old and had any form of pedigree, be it gaming pedigree or racing pedigree or just any form of clout. Those cars were starting to rise in price pretty dramatically, and I thought this is going to be a good opportunity for me to get into a Mazda RX-7 because it's something I'd always wanted, being a big Gran Turismo fan. So I went and bought that. I'd sold my Evo for around $40,000. I think I spent about the same on my RX-7. It was a very quick turnover. I think I was looking for a few months before I sold my Evo to buy my RX-7. So by the time that I'd sold the Evo to a guy up in Queensland, I bought my RX-7 from another guy up in Queensland. So sort of did a bit of a swapsies there. As I've talked about before, if you watched 2 videos previous to this one where I went to collecting cars, I actually saw my old Mazda RX-7 for the first time in the flesh in about 3.5 years and felt pretty emotional seeing it. As you'll hear about later in the video, like, this car was so special to me. I didn't have it long enough to really appreciate what it was. I think I was very young at the time. I was about 20 or 21 when I owned it, and looking back now, knowing what I know now and knowing how much I would appreciate that car now, it makes me really upset that I only had it for about 3 or 4 months before I sold it to buy my 32 GTR, but we'll talk about that in a sec. But it was really cool. It was a beautiful red color, pretty much stock. It had the engine rebuilt, it had a beautiful carbon auto XE intake. It was just the perfect level of street comfort for what I think a perfect RX-7 would be. The only thing that it needed would be coilovers and wheels, and that would have been perfect. Honestly, would have been perfect. And maybe some aesthetic things, so you could have done some feed side skirts and a carbon wing blade and 2 other little bits and bobs that I had on my list. But again, like, the market at that point was going so nuts and it was advancing so fast, and I was analyzing the car market all the time. I was looking really closely, like every single day, and I had always wanted a GTR. An R32 GTR was the only thing I could probably get at that point in time because the R34 had already risen to well above 150 grand as it was approaching its peak of what it is now, about 2 to 250. I thought, I love this RX-7. It's really cool, but it's not not a GTR, and I'm a GTR guy. And it was a bit of a conflict, but I had to move fast. So I just said, no, I'm just going to sell this and buy an R32 GTR. And it was hard. And looking back now, I don't regret it because I don't regret owning the R32 GTR. It was an awesome car. We're going to talk about that now. But I do regret having to sell the RX-7 so soon, when I think if I did a couple more mods to it and personalized it a bit, I would have appreciated it a lot more. But when I bought the R32 GTR, it was like I had ticked off this massive goal in life. I sold the RX-7 to a guy here in Melbourne, Stephen, who I've talked about in the last video. I made about, I think, $15,000, $20,000 profit or something on that car, and then spent all of that, so that's 60-ish, on the R32 GTR, and bought that down from Queensland. It was one of the cheapest on the markets, but it had all the right things. It had rebuilt engine, mods galore in terms of performance parts like Holtec ECU, and upgraded everything. All the big money had been spent on the engine bay of lots of genuine Tommi HKS parts and things of that nature. And I thought, this is what I want. I didn't want to buy a stock GTR. I wanted to buy one that had heaps of power. Yeah, I did that, bought that over. And as I said, it just felt like at that point I ticked off this massive goal in life. You know, I'm still just thinking about it now. Like that first time I saw it, that first time it rocked up to my house. I've actually got the clip. Oh. Dude, no way am I holding the bloody key to my own GTR. That's nuts. What is life? What's going? Oh, look at it. I mean, it's dirty as all shit, but holy hell. When it did rock up, it was filthy. Like, it was so dirty, but I was like, this is awesome. And I still remember that first day of getting it and taking it out without any number plates on it to the park about 500 meters from my house, and all my mates came down and we took some photos of it, and it was just a really special moment for me and for us as a friendship group, you know, to have my mates there with me while I was celebrating such a huge milestone. Because, you know, as I'd worked my way through this list, I'd been buying and selling cars with the intention of enjoying them, tidying them up, and then making some profit. Yeah, it was a really cool car. And in the meantime, while I bought that car, I also had a few daily drivers that I was just whipping through. I had a Renault Clio 172 Sport in orange, which was an introduction for my friendship group to the wild world of Clios. I think back in the day, 10 years ago, we would have all been buying EG and EK Civics. Obviously, those at that point were too highly priced, and you could still buy Clios for around $5,000. So we would buy that and just thrash the absolute crap out of it. It was hilarious. It was just such a fun car to take out when you didn't want to take out your expensive weekender. You just wanted to have fun. You didn't want to have to worry about where you were taking it, what roads you were going on, where were you going to park it. And then I had a few little issues with it. I was driving on the Southern Expressway one day coming home. I don't know how it didn't happen, but it was on the corner turning into my street. The wheel hub had essentially disconnected from the wheel, and the wheel sort of cocked itself and stuck itself under the car, which, if that had happened on the expressway, probably would have flipped me and I reckon maybe killed me. That wouldn't have been ideal. And then I was like, I'm a bit bored of this now. I've had my fun with it, sort of thrashed it around and wanted something a bit different. I like my old BMWs, and that's what I went to next. Sold that, and then a couple of days later went and found a white E34 BMW 530i, so it was a V8. It would have been the first V8 that I'd ever owned. I didn't really have it for that long. I had it for about 4 weeks, and I think 3 weeks of that was spent in the workshop because it was just so down on power. I only bought it for like $2,000, and I thought I'd got a really good deal. And on the drive home, it just conked out, and you'd put your foot down and it would sound like there was something in the engine or something in the exhaust that was stopping the power from coming through. Long story short, after about 4 weeks of it being in the workshop, I sold it somehow, again, got my money back. I've been really lucky with things like this to not really lose that much money at all on cars, and found out about 5 weeks or so later from the new owner that it was a box catalytic converter, and that was it. It was like a $300 fix, and if I'd done that, then the car would have been mint, because it had beautiful black leather interior, everything worked, all the electrics worked, the heater and aircon worked, which is a very rare mix to have in older BMWs now, as I've found in my experience. But that was fine, because I thought, if I can't have the E34, I'll get something else of the same vintage. So I went and bought an E36, an equally shit E36. And this car was, again, like, bought it from some cracky's place. Exterior wise, it looked really nice. It looked really well presented, but there was something going on in that engine that I had planned to sort of buy and fix up. I got it pretty cheap, I think, and it just felt like it had asthma. As I mentioned in my last video, it was just down on power. But I was like, it's my first E36. I was just happy to be driving a two-door E36 because I thought that they looked the absolute duck's nuts. Like, I thought they looked wicked. I still think they look wicked, you know. I'm in hot debate all the time about coupe versus sedan. Obviously I've got the sedan now, but back then, and I think overall still I prefer the two-door. But that car was something I only had for a few months again. Then one day I was at the gym down in Blackwood in Adelaide with a mate of mine, and someone spade on the back of their ute, backed out of the, accidentally reversed into me with the corner of the spade going into the corner of my boot. And it wasn't a massive impact, but it was enough to sort of put this little pinch in the boot. And I thought, oh, drove it home, parked it on the street, and overnight I came out and found my exhaust on the floor. Like the whole exhaust had fallen off the underside of the car. And I was like, that's weird. I wonder how that happened. When the person reversed into me, that shunted my exhaust pipe, and that sort of pushed it, and because the exhaust was so old and so rusted by that point, it just cracked the metal, sheared off at the front near the catalytic converter. And I remember driving it around for a bit with no exhaust on it, just feeling like the biggest idiot because it sounded awful. It sounded horrendous. There's a clip playing now, and I just thought it was funny, you know, just trying to make hay while the sun shined, I guess. And I did an alright job with that car. It got written off, and then I had an insurance payout. I bought it back and then sold it on again, and it still lives on to this day. At this point in time, you know, I was still going between my cars, I think, and then I bought a Honda Del Sol, a CRX Del Sol, and that was a really awesome little car. It was my first car with VTEC. I'd finally understood why everyone raves so much about VTEC powered cars. It was just hilarious. You know, you'd get it up through the rev range and you just hear it cross over, and it was just wicked. It was like, this is what it's about. This is why people love Civics so much, and this is why people pay so much for EG and EK Civics. And I thought, whoa, like this has really opened my mind to a whole different world, because until then I was only about, you know, RB26s, 4G63s, the 13B that I had in my RX-7. Like, I just liked those legendary turbo motors. I'm a massive RB guy, and I never thought I'd see myself as a big Honda guy, but that really opened my mind, because until that point I'd sort of written off a lot of different Hondas as just something that I'd never really want to own. I had lots of fun with that car. The fondest memory I have of it is going to multiple trips down to Blackwood, driving up Windy Point if you're from Adelaide, and pulling over at Windy Point with no roof on, and just chilling there for a while after the gym between uni classes and hanging out for a bit just with some music going. It was just so awesome to drive. It was such a direct, very, very easy little go-kart type thing, and I just loved how you could take the targa top off and put it in the boot, and it had this spot in the boot, and you could actually still access the boot from the car. Even with the roof in, you could just have this little lever. I just thought that was the most wicked little design, and it, you know, it looked pretty funky. It obviously wasn't a classically beautiful car, but again, the sort of thing that people love when they see at events and they come up and talk to you. And I met a few friends again, and people that I still speak to at car events when I'm back in Adelaide now, through that car, because it was just so unique. And then around the time of having my Del Sol, I had the opportunity to have a car given to me. It was a real cheap car. My brother wasn't using a car for a while, so I sold the Del Sol because I'd taken out a very small loan to pay for the last bit on my Evo. I wanted to clear that so I had no debt against my name, because I was at that point starting to think about wanting to buy a house at some point in the future. I think got written off at some point as well. So after a little bit of time driving my brother's car, I thought it was time to buy something else again. I wanted something fun again. I mentioned I love turbos. I wanted something under 10 grand that was turbo and manual. And one night when I was at the pub with my mates, I found the cheapest BA Ford Falcon XR6 turbo. Had a few beers by this point and eventually bought it while I was at the pub, and sent, I think, $7,500 to this random guy in Newcastle in New South Wales. Thankfully the car turned up, which was great. What was not so great was that the car was not in good condition whatsoever. It didn't notice at the time, but it was blowing proper smoke. Like, it looked like it had a severe vape addiction, because the car was just, every time you would rev it a little bit, it would just blow this massive white cloud of smoke. And lo and behold, as it so often does happen with cars when they blow massive clouds of smoke, the head gasket was gone. And I was driving it, like I actually drove it for a few weeks before I diagnosed the head gasket had gone. And I was just like, oh, you know, these Barrett engines aren't what everyone says they are. Like, I thought it was really down on power. Like, I was told it made, you know, 350 rear wheel kilowatts. Like, I was keen to rip some skids and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is really disappointing. And somehow, by some absolute miracle, managed to make my money back on that car, I think to the dollar. including transport fees and all that sort of thing. I sold it to some guy who loves his Falcons. He rebuilt the car, and I think it ended up being aquaplaned and smashed into a Stovey pole, and then he took the engine out of that car after rebuilding it and put it into another silver BA shell. So I think I made the money back on the BA because at the time XR6 turbos were going for between $10,000 to $15,000 in good running order, so there was probably a reason I got it so cheap. I probably should have looked into that a little bit sooner, but lesson learned. Moving on. Next car I bought, I think around middle of 2021, was a Toyota Crown Wagon. This was a JZS 171W. That was my first 1JZ powered car. It was lots of fun. I really loved it. I loved that it was the first car I had where you would turn on the ignition and you would have the Japanese toll reader girl speak to you. I thought that was wicked. It was just so JDM. It was something that I'd always watched on YouTube and always thought was really cool, but never had in any of my other Japanese cars because they'd all been in Australia for a long time and had the toll card reader taken out of it. Just daily drove it and just enjoyed it and enjoyed dosing around. I think the only thing I did to that car was put some R32 GTR wheels on it, which were very polarizing. People either really hated them or loved them. I think in hindsight, looking back now, I shouldn't have forced my love for R32 GTR wheels onto that car because they did look a little bit small. But again, it was like just something I wanted to try and something I had to do. But not really much to say about that car. It did its job, did what it had to do. I had a blown turbo at one point, but besides that, it wasn't too bad at all. At the same time of owning the Crown Wagon, this was after I sold my GTR, so I'd had this big influx of cash. I sold the GTR for around $80,000 or so, and I thought, okay, I'm going to put some aside for a house. I'm going to put some into cryptocurrency, and then I'm going to keep some in my account. I thought, okay, I need to split this money between two cars. I need a daily driver and I need a weekender. And I thought, what's a weekender I can buy for around $30,000-ish? Decided by my friend Evan's Mazda MX5 NA, which was turboed in red. It was a beautiful looking car. He had done an amazing job with the build using all these very cool specialized MX5 parts that, you know, essentially the Nismo equivalent of Mazda's. There were bits of Mazda speed on it. There were also lots of really cool MX5 tuning house parts on it. Like, it was really cool. It satisfied my need for something unique and something fast. I thought it was going to be this really awesome little go-kart. You know, it was going to be like this little F1 car for the road because it was so tiny. It had this really tiny, beautiful Momo steering wheel on it. And I was like, yep, awesome. This will be something that I can buy and just take out on the weekends and enjoy. Sadly, my ownership experience was anything but that. From the moment I bought it, all these issues just popped up. For the record, I know it wasn't Evan's fault. It was just one of those things when you buy a car that has been turboed when it's not supposed to be turboed. You know, you haven't got it taken to get any professional checks and balances done on it. Things pop up, and then this list blew out. I took it to a couple of workshops that just didn't really do the most amazing job with it, and it was an incredibly frustrating experience. That is the single most frustrated I've ever been with any car that I've ever owned, and it genuinely almost made me consider just leaving cars behind because I was just like, this is a nightmare. I'm just spending heaps of money on this car. It is not getting fixed. Every time I fix something, something else comes up, and it almost genuinely almost killed my passion for cars entirely. But it didn't. I did get it fixed, and then as soon as it was fixed properly, I enjoyed it for about a week and then sold it. I was like, I'm not letting anything else go wrong with this. It's already cost me way too much. I am over it. I don't want it in my life anymore. Just go, be gone, get out of here, and just do not come back. And I was fine with that because I had the Crown Wagon at the time too. So I was like, at least I've still got a turbo car. You know, the Crown Wagon was auto. It was heavy. It wasn't that fun, but it was just fun to dose around really. But it's not really the sort of car that you'd take up and throw around through the hills. It was just cool to put stuff in and chill out in because it was so comfortable. I have this really rogue car on my list, and it only fits in here for one specific reason, and that is a Ford AU Fairmont. A couple of my mates and I bought this car for a challenge that we did as a group of friends. We did what we call the bottom gear challenge, play on words of Top Gear. We essentially all bought cars under $1,000 in teams of 3 or 4, and then we drove them to rural South Australia. We stayed at a shack and then did challenges in the cars off-road, and it was just heaps of fun. It was so much fun just to get away. It was one of the first holidays I had with my mates, and our car got there and back perfectly with no issues, and then managed to sell the car after. But we had these hilarious stickers on it, you know, again inspired by Top Gear, that when you'd open the doors they'd have subliminal messages that you wouldn't be able to see when the doors were shut, and it was just heaps of fun. But that car came and went pretty quickly. I did not like it, and my mum particularly did not like it, sitting out the front of her house with those vial stickers on it, and I just had to get rid of it really quick, because at that point I had the MX5 for a bit. I think was around the time I was still trying to sell that, and I also had, which is the next car I'll talk about, another Renault Clio 172. So the Ford came and went, and I was very thankful for it to be gone, because it was a bit filthy and manked by that point. So my next Renault Clio Sport 172 still exists within my friendship group today. It's been through so many hands. I was in Canberra at the time when it popped up, and Evan, who I bought the MX5 off, sent it to me and was like, oh, like, you've got to get this. And essentially he went and bought it for me, and I bought a sight unseen, sent him the money. It was around $4,500 or something. That was so much fun. Like, it had been essentially stripped and prepared for track, so it had all these mods on it, weight saving. It was a lot better than my previous Clio, but it was still a Clio, you know, it was still French. I had that for a bit. It was just sort of a smash around car. Like, it wasn't really, I don't know, I wouldn't even call it a weekender. I would just take it out when I wanted to rev bang something and not really care too much about where I was going or what I was driving. But it was pretty fun to throw up around the hills. Very, very light, very easy to drive car. I should have taken it to the track. That's why I did sort of buy it. I was like, oh, I want a track car, and then bought a track car and never took it to the track, as so many people do have that experience. But then I sold it to my mate Alex, and then he sold it to Evan. Now Tom owns it. So if you want to check out the Clio, Tom's Instagram is here on the screen, and he still has it. It's still fighting strong. I don't know how it hasn't exploded after it's been through the hands of our friendship group. It's just like, it shouldn't be alive still. Moving on was, I decided at this point, I was like, okay, I have had my time with the older stuff. I need something new. I need something reliable. I want something modern and fast. So I hastily sold my Toyota Crown Wagon. I've lost a bit of money on that one, sadly, because the market for those cars was just a bit dry, and I wasn't willing to wait, to be patient. I went and bought a BMW M135i, a pre-facelift 2012, and this one already had a tune done. It already had an intake. It already had an exhaust. It already had the basics done, which was great. I was like, perfect, that's what I want. I picked it up pretty cheap because the guy was in a rush to sell it, and then I thought, awesome. Like, I've done a grown-up thing. I've bought a modern car. I bought something practical. I bought something professional. Bought something that's fun. I was like, cool, I've ticked all these boxes. And then I owned that for about a year and a half. And in that time, did heaps of mods to it. Like, lip kit on that car, as most people do. I think it was a Maxton front and side skirts and a Z-Aero rear diffuser. I put a carbon roof spoiler on. I put some raised ZE40 bronze wheels on. It's my favorite mod I did to that car. Upgraded the brakes, Eibach springs, kidney grills, and I think that was pretty much it to the exterior. It looked really cool. It was a really, really cool little car. You know, obviously that didn't come without its issues. I had a coil pack go throughout all my sensors one day. I was just like, whoa, I just stopped in the middle of the freeway, and it was just really bizarre. But that was the only thing that I had go wrong with it, and I was at 180,000-ish Ks, I think, and I thought, oh, it's really high Ks. I think maybe it's time to move this on. I thought, it's at the age now where things start to go wrong in these cars, and when they do start to go wrong, they're pretty expensive. So I sold that after about a year and a half of owning it and modifying it and enjoying it. And then I bought a Toyota Crown GWS 204, so it was a hybrid. And again, this was me trying to be sensible. I was like, okay, I'm selling this car. This was after I bought my house. I was like, I've got a house now. I need something that's not going to cost me much money to maintain. It's not going to cost me heaps of money to insure. It's not going to cost me any money unexpectedly. So I decided to buy a hybrid Toyota. And if you've watched my Instagram, you know how that went. That did not go very well. My hybrid battery, essentially 2 months after buying the car, decided to show some signs of degradation, and I was a bit pissed about that. I was a bit annoyed. So I got rid of that as quickly as possible, and then I bought a BMW E36 323i, which is the car that I own now. And obviously that car is a continuing part of my journey. It's one that I've had since August of last year, and it's not going anywhere soon. I can't really afford to replace it at the moment, so that's just sticking with me at the minute, and then we'll see what comes next. But I also did mention motorbikes, so I want to touch on the motorbikes really quickly. I know you want to see what I've rated as my top 5, but I've had a scooter. I started with this horrendously bad scooter called an MCI Speed Jet when I first got into motorbikes and whatnot. I thought, okay, I want to get a motorbike, but I'll start on a scooter. This MCI Speed Jet was just horrendous. It was a 50cc scooter, because that's all you could get without having a motorbike license in South Australia. You could only get up to 50cc. So I had that, felt like such a dick on that, riding it to work, sold it, and then bought a Yamaha Jog, which in my opinion is peak scooter, again 50cc, but that felt much zippier. It was a bit smaller, it was a bit more cool, I guess, if you can call scooters cool. And then I thought, okay, I'm ready for a motorbike. I went and did my motorbike test. I bought a Kawasaki ZX2R, so the original, 250cc Honda CBR 250RR competitor. Awesome bike, revved out to around 18,000 RPM. Awesome, sounded great. Only problem was not many parts on the spare market. That was a nightmare when my cooling system in that bike, and I spent so many hours, so many days after long days at work trying to fix that thing, and somehow after hours and hours and hours, things going wrong and undoing hoses and just trying to figure out what the hell I could do to fix it. I did fix it. Essentially the barb on the engine block had rusted off or just corroded down over time, and there was essentially no barb on the engine block, so I essentially had to chemi weld it like with some putty and make a new barb and then stick a hose back on, clamp it down and pray to God that it fixed itself. It fixed itself. I sold it, got rid of that, told the buyer all the problems, by the way. I didn't just sell it and pretended I didn't. And then I bought still the best bike that I've only had a few bikes, but it's still the best bike that I've ever owned. And that was a Triumph Speed Triple 660. That was awesome. That was fast. That was fast. I think it's one of the fastest LAMS bikes that you can get. LAMS being learner approved motorcycle scheme. Basically L-plate bikes. I think that was the quickest one you could have gotten, or one of, and it was just awesome. Like the 3-cylinder sounded incredible. Torque curve on it was unbelievable, and the feeling was insane when you would ride that thing. It was just nuts. And I had that for a little while. I just thought, okay, I'm having lots of fun on this. I'm having too much fun on this. I think maybe I should go and try something different. But then I thought, I've got a mortgage now. I've got my M135. I've got a motorbike. I'm going to just take it a bit easier. I'm going to get rid of the motorbike for now, come back to it a bit later. And this was around the time of me moving over here to Melbourne. I thought, I'm not going to take the bike with me. I'll just, there'll be one over there. I'll free up some cash for the move, and got rid of the bike to my mate Tom. Shout out Tom, if you're watching this, not the same Tom as before, but a different Tom. And he loves it. He's still got it now, rides it to work all the time, which is awesome. And then moved to Melbourne, and here we are now. But just with the E36, there are plenty more cars that I want. Of course, there's always cars on my list. There are millions of cars for millions of different price points and milestones in life and other things that I hopefully will be achieving soon. The E36 is the one that is staying with me. After selling my Triumph and moving to Melbourne, I missed having a motorbike, and I wanted another one. And I'd always really wanted a MC22. So on Marketplace, I found a 1990 Honda CBR 250RR in tricolour, which was the fairing kit that I'd always loved. It was one that I'd always seen the pictures of on Instagram, and I thought, okay, this is the colour that I want. And I wanted one originally when I bought my ZX2R, but I couldn't find any for sale in Adelaide. So I went and drove all the way across the city and bought this bike. It was pretty late at night, and rode it all the way back across the city, which was only, I think, my second time crossing the city since I'd moved to Melbourne, and I was doing it on a motorbike. And I had this very fond memory of cruising up along the Westgate Bridge next to a McLaren 720S. Being on the motorbike and hearing the McLaren rev past me was really special. I had a bit of fun with that bike. I found I was still getting used to Melbourne, and I should probably just sell it because I didn't really like seeing it sit there. So I sold it in April, and I bought it in November, so I only had it for a few months, and that was because I didn't really want to get stuck out somewhere where I had no idea where I was and then be fiddling with the map while I was on the bike. And I thought, it's just easier to be in the car when you're out exploring and trying to figure out where to go, and just found that I wasn't really riding it that much. And when I did ride it, it was only to really close local spots, which I live in a pretty condensed area, and it wasn't really the most enjoyable riding conditions. I was also really big for the bike. The bike was made for small Japanese men. I'm 6'2", so every time I was riding it, my knees would be up in my stomach, and it was a bit slow. So I was like, this isn't really what I thought it was going to be, and I just got rid of it. I would have loved to keep it as an art piece, because every time I looked at it in the garage, I was like, this is awesome. I found myself getting more excited about looking at it in the garage rather than taking it out to ride it, and I thought, what's the point of that? So I sold that. Now I've just got the E36, and that's the only vehicle that I have at the moment. So it feels weird having so many now just being cut down to one. It's just the way it is at the moment. So that is around 26 different vehicles. Now it's time to rate my top 5. Out of all of those, which ones were the most special to me and why? So here we go. Starting with number 1, my Mitsubishi Evo TME. As I said, that was the best car that I have ever driven. It was the most memorable car that I've ever driven. If I close my eyes and think of a driving experience, I can still picture myself driving that car. It just felt unreal in the Adelaide Hills. There is nothing to me that can compare to the feeling of that car with the all-wheel drive, factory anti-lag turbo, just everything. Complete package, awesome pedigree, awesome history, awesome looking car. It just felt incredible. Didn't even need that many mods. It was just, oh, I would kill for a red one. A red sticker pack TME is so high on my list just to replicate that feeling. So that goes down as my number one most memorable car that I've owned. Number two is my Mazda RX-7. I only had this for a few months. I never got to experience 20% of what I could have experienced in this car, and I still am kicking myself every single day when I think about the reason why I want to work hard. It's not just to buy an R34 GTR, but it's to buy one of those as well. Like, I need one of those in my garage again. I miss it so terribly. It was absolutely insane. Number three, of course, my R32 GTR. I can't sit in front of all this GTR memorabilia and not say that my GTR is in my top three most memorable cars. Not only just because of how quick it was and just how mind-bendingly stupid you felt when you drove that car for just how quick you could go. It was next level, 800 horsepower, blows your mind. It was unreal. I think what I enjoyed about that car the most was that it was marking off such a significant milestone in my life. Like, besides buying my house, that was the most significant milestone, financial milestone in my life. And I'll always remember the feeling that I had when I bought that car of pure achievement and elation. It was very special and reminds me why I want to keep working hard again, to feel that way again when I do make a significant purchase. And to have a GTR, know that you're driving something with so much history, something that I've admired for years, played in the video games, all that sort of thing, was really, really special. To listen to Fast and Furious songs in it, all that sort of stuff. It made me feel very emotional every time I got in that car. Sadly, just so expensive and had to buy the house, so I had to let go of it. Otherwise, I'd probably still have it. Number four is my R32 Golf. That car started it all for me, really. Like, it helped give this YouTube channel a voice. It helps me go out there and film content and make friends and do all sorts of different things and learn new skills. Like, I have lots of memories just going out and just learning in that car, experiencing all sorts of different things and having fun. And that was what it was all about. I think that's a very pivotal moment for me in my life, was buying that car and having those experiences. So that's why that one stays on my list as number four. And I can't forget that sound. That sound was just unreal. Rounding out the list at number five is my Honda Del Sol. Again, as I mentioned, I can still close my eyes and picture myself at Windy Point, just enjoying a day where all I had to do was have casual work and uni, and life was easy and life was cool. Just sitting there listening to some tunes with the Targa roof off and just enjoying myself on a sunny day. That car was just hilarious fun. I would love to buy another one or some form of VTEC powered car, but I think that car specifically, like, I do like the Civics, but that Del Sol, there was just something about it. It was just really cool. You could put the back window down, you could take the Targa roof off, you could put your main windows down, and it felt like you were in a fully fledged convertible. And then as soon as it started raining, which it so often did when I had the roof down, all you had to do was pull over, chuck the back window up, chuck your main windows up, run to the boot, throw the roof on the car, which you could do as one person because it was pretty light, and lock it down, and away you went. And it was like you were driving a two-door coupe. I thought that was really cool. Having that variety was awesome. So I do miss that car a lot. Again, gave me and my mates lots of really special experiences, and just the way it made you feel when you drove it, of just being happy and just having fun and laughing and smiling, was pretty irreplaceable. There's a lot of other cars I could have included on these lists, but if I only had to pick five, those are my five. To summarize them again, it's my Evo, my RX-7, my GTR, my R32 Golf, and my Honda Del Sol. Those are my top five cars. You've got a little brief history on my cars today, and I really appreciate you if you've stuck around this far. Thank you so much. I hope you've learned a little bit about me. I would love to know what your favorite cars are that you've owned in the comments below. So send me your top five. If you don't have five, just send me one or two. If you don't even have two, just send me the only car you've owned, because it has to be your favorite car. Again, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe for more videos like this and all the other stuff that I do. You can find all my social media links in the description below. I'm going really hard on my TikTok and my Instagram at the moment to share some behind the scenes content for you. Please give those a follow. Like this video for more. Subscribe to the channel as I mentioned. My name's Pat. You've been watching 2PJZ. We'll see you next time.